So we're finally starting to see some of the rats that left the Biden sinking ship speak out. We've been hoping for the tell-all books and the exclusive interviews about how bad things really were. Now, listen, we don't have a top dog here, but we have somebody who worked in the press and communications office who's starting to tell some stories about just how protected Joe and Jill Biden were, not just at the White House, but on the campaign trail. Take a look. This is an ex-Biden White House staffer. The New York Post has the write-up, ripping former president's team for approving quotes and scripting questions. It was really unethical. And take a look at the pictures. You remember this. When he would do these interviews, you do these press availabilities, and not only the name of the reporter he was supposed to call was written out on the card, but the actual question was already pre-screened. Right? We've seen this. We know this is the case. And these journalists, these prostitutes with a byline, were just fine with this. These are people who will lecture you night and day about the ethical demands of the First Amendment and how this is the fourth estate and they're required to speak truth to power. And meanwhile, they were on their knees begging for an opportunity to ask a pre-approved and sometimes pre-scripted question of the leader of the free world. So here's the dude. He appeared on the Young Turks with Schenk Uyghur. Is that how we're pronouncing it these days? Let's go with it. And he told all. And God bless this guy. Now, I've got plenty to say about him, but let's have him have his say first.
How do you bully the press? What do you threaten?
Well, look, there are a lot of ways. I mean, I thought it was weird that they only did interviews for quote approval. There was this thing in Biden world about quote approval. Everything had to be on quote approval. So you talk to a reporter, but like one person decides what the reporter can use, what quotes they can use. There was weird things like that. I mean, you saw.
I just because you might not speak journalese, let me just explain if you missed it. So somebody may interview the president, and after the interview, then someone from the comms team comes over and looks through what the president said and then has veto power over what the reporter can print or not, or communicate. Okay, I give approval for that quote. Oh, but you can't tell anyone he said this. I mean, it's complete and total manipulation and control of the media. And the real scandal here, just so you know, is the fact that the media was fine with it. The real scandal is we're only hearing about this now from a former staffer at the White House. We didn't hear it on day one from the reporters who cover the White House. You think if Trump tried to do this, or Caroline Leavitt, or Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or Kayleigh McEnany, or Sean Spicer, you think if they tried to do that, we wouldn't hear about it with a red siren and a breaking news and impeachment articles being drafted? Of course. Listen to what happened here. Listen to what the media was just fine with here.
Them get caught trying to script questions to radio reporters that summer, or summer of 2024. It was very reminiscent to me of being on the campaign in 2020, where these young press staffers in these states like New Hampshire or Iowa or Nevada, they were sort of like dog trained to make the questions conditional for interviews. And I said to them, please never ask the journalist for the questions ahead of time. You can always ask about the topics, but do not ask them for the questions for Dr. Biden. And they said, well, that's what, the other side tells us to do for him. I said, that's okay, fine. That's their problem. My job was to protect my boss, and they could handle we call it the boys' side. The boys' team could do their thing with regard to prepping him for interviews. But I did not want that. I knew from being a former producer at NBC, having long relationships in the press, that was just like 101. It was really unethical to be doing that. But these young kids are really taught to make that a part of their sort of pre-screening for interviews.
All right, now I got to jump in here for a minute. Again, this guy's name is Michael LaRosa, and as you just heard, he used to be a producer for NBC News, and then he took this job on the campaign. The story he just told was about the 2020 campaign, and he worked on the comms team for Dr. Biden. That would be the future First Lady Jill, and how they worked with reporters versus how the president's team worked with reporters. And on the president's team, everything was pre-approved, everything was qualified, everything was, and he was sort of quarreling about whether that's ethical for journalists to do that. And understand, he just acknowledged that all of that behavior was unethical, right? He knew better. Now, you would think that after experiencing that on the campaign and seeing how unethical the operation was and how manipulative and bullying the operation was to the media, that this guy, with his integrity and his knowledge and his morals, that he would want nothing more to do with these people, right? It's like, okay, the election's over. I've done my job. I'm going to go back to the private sector. In fact, I'll go back to work for NBC News, and I'm going to speak truth to power and push back against this Biden White House, right? That's what he would do. That's what any normal person with ethics and morals would do. Is that what he did? Let's watch.
Yeah. It's amazing to me that no one in the press complained about it.
Well, I kind of always wondered that myself. Like, why didn't any of these reporters, even in New Hampshire and some of these small town papers or local news, like, why didn't anybody ever say anything? I thought it was so weird at the time, but it was my first presidential campaign. I'm thinking, okay, maybe these people know better than I do. But no, it was just, I learned over the course of the next 4 years, and I learned a lot last summer, just how bad their instincts actually are, and how their instincts really didn't serve the president very well, because no matter how hostile they were or how punitive they were to the reporters covering Biden, his press coverage never improved. In fact, it only got worse.
Yeah. Over the next 4 years, I learned just how bad it would get. So yeah, he's Mr. Morals now. He's Mr. Ethics. He's Mr. Pearl Clutching. I can't believe how they treated the press. And then after that campaign, he was more than happy to take a job with the administration and continue for the next 4 years. It's impressive, dude. Really, you should be proud. Meanwhile, let's walk down memory lane and take a look at some of the moments where President Biden obviously got a little bit of an assist, not just from the media, journalists who were supposed to be covering him, but from the press office who bullied and controlled that media.
Okay. Third, next question. Who do I call on next? Hang on a second. I got my list here. Hang on. I apologize. Aurelia of AFP.
There you go. It was all scripted. It's really something compared to what our current president does with the media. Not only was the list of reporters already pre-approved, but the questions were pre-approved, and in some cases, the questions were pre-scripted, and his answers were pre-scripted. He had his answers on little cards.
Who wishes to get out of Afghanistan? We will find them, and we will get them out. Ladies and gentlemen, they gave me a list here. The first person I was instructed to call on was Kelly O'Donnell of NBC.
The first person I was instructed to call on. Can you imagine the president of the United States, our current president, Donald Trump, ever using language like that? Well, no, because he's not used to being controlled by people. This guy, well, it was second nature, I guess. One more.
Since there's so many people out there, been given a list. Now, how about Chris of the Associated Press? First question.
Given a list. Can't go off the list. All right, one more.
I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Those reporters should be really proud. Thank God they upheld those journalistic ethics right up to the end, right through that campaign. They're the best.